Welcome back. In this video, we'll give you an overview of the reading section of the ACT, explain Griffith's strategies for this content, and give a short tutor demo. Let's get started. The reading section of the ACT has 4 passages, with each containing 10 corresponding questions. These questions require the test takers to use reasoning skills to determine main ideas, understand sequence of events, make comparisons, comprehend cause and effect relationships, and draw generalizations. The questions vary from very specific questions about a particular sentence or phrase in the passage to very broad questions about the theme or purpose of a passage. Much like the English section, we want the students to focus on the specific questions and not spend too much time on the broad questions. Because it's impossible to teach reading comprehension in a 90-minute session, we want to focus on teaching students how to read and restate the ACT questions. The ACT does a very good job asking confusing questions, so most of the battle is understanding what the questions are asking. This is best accomplished by restating the question in your own words. Students should practice and develop this skill with you during the tutoring session. So, when you're tutoring, before reading any passages, have the student look at the first question and ask them to restate the question in their own words. The easiest way to do this is to start questions with words like who, what, when, where, or how, and complete the thought, making sure that all of the key words are included in the restatement. Let's look at a couple of examples. Number 8 is a typical question you'll see on the reading section. The question reads, "It can logically be inferred from the passage that the reason it has been a long time since Fran and Linda Rose have seen each other is because..." So this question is really wordy. If your student were to restate it in their own words, they could make it something more simple and easy to understand, like, why has it been a long time since Fran and Linda Rose have seen each other? Putting the question in more simple wording could help your student find the answer more easily. Now let's look at question 1. Again, a confusing question. It reads, "Fran would most likely agree with which of the following statements about her relationship with Linda Rose?" This can really simply be restated as, how would Fran describe her relationship with Linda Rose? Students might struggle with this a bit initially, but be patient and have them practice this skill over and over. We want this restatement to be second nature. Have them restate questions until they have the hang of this and can do it fairly quickly. And don't be afraid to have them restate all 40 questions. Once they have the hang of this, then you'll begin to talk about strategies to actually answer the questions themselves. Like the English and math sections, this section has different styles of questions. For reading, there are reasonably inferred questions, vocabulary questions, and broad questions. The reasonably inferred questions direct you to a particular topic or section in the passage, and the answers can be inferred based on the information given. If the question references the same topic, the student should find where the topic is in the passage, read that section, and retrieve the answer. If the question references a specific line, go directly to that line and answer that question. Question 7 is a good example of a specific topic-inferred question. You can see that this question talks about the specific action when Fran hands a letter to her mother, so you and the student just need to go directly to that part of the passage to answer the question. For this one, that's line 55 to 58, and you can answer the question based on the information provided. Question 4 is a good example of a specific line-inferred question. They tell you in this question they want you to refer to a particular paragraph. Go to that paragraph, read it quickly, and pull out the main point. This specific line question is a little trickier than most because it directs you to a specific paragraph rather than a line itself. Most of them will direct you to a line, saying something like, go to line 6, for instance. The second type of question is vocabulary, which also directs you to a particular part of the passage and asks you a question about a specific word or phrase. For these questions, students should look at the neighboring words and sentences to help provide context and meaning. Here's an example. Let's look at question 16. Here the question specifically mentions line 17 and asks you to define how the word circumscribed is used in this passage. The student should read line 17 and the surrounding sentences if needed, in order to get a sense of the context and meaning of the word. The last type of question is a broad question. Much like the broad questions in the English section, these questions ask about the passage as a whole. We deal with them in much the same way as we deal with the English broad questions. We ask students to skip broad questions in the reading section and come back to them when there's time at the end. If students get stumped on a broad question, they should cross off the answers they know are wrong and see if they can narrow it down to 2 answers. They should then guess between those 2 answers and move on. Here's an example of a broad question. The question is asking for the main point of the passage. Students should read the question and answer choices and see if they can narrow the answer choices down to just a few that could be correct. After doing this, they should pick their guess letter or one of the answers that seems like it could be correct and move on. They should spend a minimal amount of time on this question. Now, when students are working through the reading section, they can read the passages in any order they want to. There are 4 different types of passages in the reading section. You'll always be given a prose fiction passage, a social science passage, a humanities passage, and a natural science passage. Now, it's really hard to complete all 40 questions reading all 4 of the passages, so we recommend that you have your student thoughtfully tackle 3 passages instead of trying to rush through all 4. You might find that certain passages are easier to read or understand for your student. Have your student figure out what those passages are and focus on those ones on test day. Another thing to consider when determining which passages to read is to quickly skim the subject matters of the passages and see if any of them sound interesting. It's always easier to read something that you're interested in. Another strategy is to look for passages that have shorter paragraphs. Typically, passages that are more clearly organized by numerous paragraphs are easier to read than passages that have 2 or 3 really long paragraphs. Another thing you can do is to skim the questions, doing a quick restatement, and pick the 3 passages that seem to have the most reasonably inferred or vocabulary questions. The passage we've been referencing in this video is frankly one that I would skip because there are a lot of broad questions and even the inferred questions could be more specific. Remind your students that they only have 5 minutes to go through this process. This will give them the 30 minutes left over to tackle the passages themselves. Okay, this is a lot of information, so let me give you a quick recap in the form of a demo. I would start the tutoring session with a short overview, saying, this is the reading section. Here you'll be asked to read 4 passages and complete 40 questions. That's 10 questions per passage. You'll have 35 minutes to read the 4 passages and answer all 40 questions. There are 3 different types of questions that you'll see here: reasonably inferred questions, vocabulary questions, and broad questions. Reasonably inferred questions ask you about a specific topic or a specific line within the passage. Vocabulary questions ask about the meaning of a word, and broad questions ask about the passage as a whole. The easiest questions to answer in the reading section are reasonably inferred questions and vocabulary questions, because they ask about a small portion of the passage, as opposed to the broad questions, which ask about your comprehension of the passage as a whole. Like with English and math, we're going to spend our time tackling the questions we can answer quickly and easily in the reading section, and skipping time-consuming questions. This means we'll focus on vocab and reasonably inferred questions, and skip the broad questions. Make sure when you're skipping to fill in an answer, because the ACT doesn't penalize for guessing. So let's go through the first 5 questions on the test and see if we can identify the types. Now, as a warning, the reading questions can be confusing. So, to make them easier to understand, you'll want to restate them in your own words. It may be easiest if you restate the questions using words like who, what, when, where, or how. Then I would have my student restate and identify the first 5 questions. I'd continue to give them questions to restate and identify until they've mastered that skill. Once they'd done so, I'd move on to teaching the strategies for approaching the passages. I'd say, on test day, you might not have time to get through all 4 passages, so what you'll want to do is pick 3 passages that you can get through most easily and quickly. In a moment, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to skim through the passages, and I want you to list them in order from easiest to hardest. What I mean by this is the first one is the one that you think you could do most quickly and easily, and the last one is the one that you think would give you the most trouble. Right now, I'm going to give you a few tips to help you determine this order. You're going to spend the first 5 minutes doing this on test day. So, the first tip is to look for the passages that seem interesting to you. It's always easier to comprehend a passage that you're interested in. The next tip is to look for passages with really short paragraphs. They're often a lot easier to comprehend than longer paragraphs. Next, you can look through the questions corresponding to each passage and restate them in your own words. Once you've done this, you'll be able to identify the different types of questions corresponding to each passage. Remember, our strategy is always to focus on easier questions, so you'll want to pick the passages that have the most vocab and reasonably inferred questions. Remember, the reasonably inferred questions direct you to a specific line or topic, while broad questions ask about the passage as a whole. From here, I'd give my student 5 minutes to determine the order that works best for him or her. Once complete, I'd give them 10 minutes to complete the questions corresponding to one passage and then review. I'd continue working through the test, reinforcing the strategies for the rest of the session. As you may know, bench prep is optional for this session. The bench prep guide for the reading section is provided along with the other documents, but feel free to work on different subjects if your student needs practice in another area. As always, feel free to reach out with any questions or comments, and thank you again.